election by by federal law. But the next big deadline that is ahead of us is October 4th, which is the voter registration deadline, which is 30 days before the election. So the Rhode Island Constitution and state law talks about you having to be registered to vote at least 30 days before the election, which is always a Sunday. It's this year it's October 4th. So I'm glad that I'm with you to talk a little bit about registering people to vote. I know that because we're not out in the public like we usually are, and there aren't as many events going on, we need all the help that we can get to make sure that people have the information they need to update their information. And one of the toughest parts about having a 30-day window before an election to have to register to vote is that a lot of people, even though everyone hears about the commercials and knows who's running for president and knows who's running for the offices, people don't tend to think about where they vote or if they're registered to vote until like 2 or 3 weeks before the election. And by the time that happens, it's going to be too late for someone to have changed their information, or if you need to register to vote. So I want to just talk a little bit about that registration process, so that when you're out in your communities and with your networks, that you can help people get the information they need to register to vote. As Kennedy mentioned, my name is Rob Rock. I'm the Director of Elections for the Secretary of State's office. And again, happy to be with you today. And if there's any questions, just, you can shout them. I don't know if everyone's unmuted, but you can certainly, shout them out or use the chat. I am going to share my screen so that we can walk through the voter registration form. It's a pretty easy form to fill out, although there are some things that I always like to mention to people as they're registering folks to vote, because you'll have some questions, I'm sure, that people will ask of you as they're filling out the form. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I hopefully do this correctly. Let's see, we're going to share this one. Okay, can everyone see the Voter Information Center? You can see that? Okay, perfect. So this is our homepage, and I'm going to refer to it quite a bit over the course of the training, but you can do a lot of things. You can, if you're already registered to vote, you can update your voter information. So if you've moved or you want to change your party, you click this tab, you put in your driver's license number, and you're able to update your information. If you're not registered to vote at all, you can click on this tile and you can register to vote. If you want to view a polling place or your sample ballot, which actually sample ballots will be up by the end of the week for the November election. So if you click on your information now, you'll put in your address, and it'll show that you've got an election coming up, but it won't show the sample ballot quite yet. It'll be ready by the end of the week. For those that are going to vote by mail ballot, you can track the status of your mail ballot by clicking this. And then we've got a tile here if you have questions about voting by mail, or as we're calling it, voting at home, voting from home this year. So this is a great one-stop shop for any election questions. You've got the mail ballot application for the November election here. It's due on October 13th, although we've sent one to everybody, so you should have received it already. If you haven't, you'll get it in the next couple days. Information about how to vote early. So we have a law in place that allows you to go to your city or town hall on the 20 days before an election and vote an in-person mail ballot. An in-person actual ballot where you slide it into a voting machine. The new part about this year during the early voting section is that you actually slide it into a voting machine now, as opposed to leaving in an envelope with the Board of Canvassers. So that's pretty cool that you essentially are voting like you would at a polling place, but you can do it before Election Day. There's tons of information on here. I'm not going to go through all of it, but questions about how to vote in person or how to vote by mail. If you're a candidate, you've got some information here, although everything is pretty much old because the candidates are already on the ballot and things are moving forward. How elections work in Rhode Island, find a drop box. If you click on this link, and I just want to show you real quickly that it shows all the drop boxes that are going to be located throughout the state. There's one at every city and town hall. So when you zoom in on Rhode Island, you'll see that there's all the black spots here are where the drop box locations are for mail ballots. So if you don't want to mail your ballot back, you can drop it at a drop box, and one of the locations listed on the screen. And then we've got a lot of information about data and forms and things, and that's where I'm going to take you now, publications and forms. We've got a whole bunch of things here that have information about registering and about voting, but we're going to specifically talk about the voter registration form today. And here's the one-page form that all of you probably have seen a million times and will have in your cars and wherever else over the next couple weeks as we close in on the voter registration deadline. So what I would suggest is, and I don't know if you've got any events planned or if you have any set goals of how this is going to work, but I suggest printing out 10 or 15 or 20 or 50 copies from our website and just always have them on hand. As you're, out and about with your networks, you can have them ready. I have a bunch in my car so that when someone ever moves or whatnot, I can register them to vote. So you can print them right from our website and have them in your on you so that you can register people as you come across them. I just want to go through the form from top to bottom just to go through it. Again, most of it is pretty easy and self-explanatory, but there are some things that I'd like to mention. The first part up at the top talks about what you're going to use the form for as the voter, as the applicant. Are you a new voter? Are you just updating your information, or are you doing a party change? To be quite honest with you, that information is not overly necessary. If someone doesn't check it off, it's not a big deal. But it gives the city or town a little bit of knowledge before they move on about what the individual is doing on this form. Not every piece of information on this form needs to be filled in, but there are certain things that must be filled in that are required. And one of those required sections is this eligibility section up here. So you've got to answer yes to all three of these questions in order to be able to register to vote in Rhode Island. So you've got to be a citizen of the United States, you've got to be a resident of Rhode Island, and you've got to be at least 16 years of age. It's kind of odd that you can't vote until you're 18, but you can register to vote at 16. And the point is to get folks into the system, younger folks into the system, so that they can, have the ability to get a letter from their town saying, hey, congratulations, you're pre-registered. You can't vote yet, but you're on the list. And once you turn 18, you'll be able to vote. So if anyone answers no to any of those, they should not continue filling out the form because they're not eligible to do so. Personal information is obviously required. Your last name, your first name, your date of birth are absolutely required. Suffix and middle initial, if you have them, you should put them on there. And then phone and email is optional. Right in the parentheses, it does say it's optional. While you don't need to offer this information, it is good to know that as you're helping people register, that all of the information on this form, with the exception of the next section, is considered public information. So we give out this information, and we have to give it out by law to anyone, who asks for it. So if you're somebody who likes to get phone calls about surveys and from candidates asking who you're going to vote for, then you can write your name or email down. If you don't like that, I suggest not putting your phone number or your email, because again, we make this public by law. So again, not your responsibility to let voters know, but it is important that if asked, that this information is considered public. But the phone and email is not something you have to provide. It's not a must. You certainly can if you want, but you don't have to. And Kennedy, I'm going to ask you, could you monitor the chat for me?
Yes, actually, Sonia has asked a question.
Okay.
She wants to know if we can hand this form in person, and if so, where?
Yeah, so you can hand it in person. Every city and town hall is their voting offices are open. Now, it might, like our office specifically, we're closed to the public, but if someone needs to get into our office to get a voter ID, you call us, we're going to let you in. That's not a problem. Most cities and towns, I think all cities and towns operate the same way. So if you've got a voter registration form, you can bring it right to city or town hall. You can bring it right to our office. If you're somebody who's going to be registering a lot of people, and instead of delivering them to each of the city and town halls, you can drop them off at our office or the Board of Elections to make it a little bit easier on yourself. So you can drop those forms off in person if you'd like, and you should do it at an elections office. So one of the 39 cities and towns, our office at 148 West River Street, or the Board of Elections at 2000 Plainfield Pike in Cranston. So the next section on the form is the identification numbered section, very important section. Again, note that this information is not considered public, so it's not going to be released, but we do ask for a driver's license or a state ID number. If you don't have, or if they don't have one of those, they should provide the last four of their social security numbers. And the reason for that is because the city or town needs to validate who you are. So they validate it by plugging in those numbers into a database, and it comes back with, yes, this is who it is. And then the city or town is also going to follow up with a letter once this is processed to make sure that the address you've provided is accurate. So you do have to provide that identification. If you don't have a driver's license or a state ID or a social, which again is very, very few people, then you're going to check that. They're going to check that bottom box, that third box. I have not been issued a Rhode Island driver's license, state ID, or social security number. Very rare. I would venture to guess that you are not going to come across that. But if you do, they're going to check off that bottom box. And then they're going to actually, so just, as a point of information, if they do check that box that they don't have a driver's license or a state ID, or a social security number, then they're going to have to show an extra form of ID when they vote because their identity wasn't able to be validated through the registration process. The next section is, again, very, very important. The home address section, your residence address. Very important to note that this must be your residence, even if you do not get mail at your house. So there's a lot of folks that have a P.O. box, for example, and don't get mail at their house. You still need to provide your residence. You'll notice in parentheses it says not a P.O. box. So put down your, or they would put down their residence address, because where they live, where they physically live, where their house is located, is going to determine what polling place they go to and what ballot they see on election day. So they have to provide that residence address. Home address, the number, the unit number, the city or town, state is already filled in. You can see that if someone's from Connecticut or Massachusetts, they can't fill out this form. I'm not sure where all of you are going to be when you're out asking people to register, but if you're at a location where there are people then other than just Rhode Islanders, perhaps, you know, a big event, which again is not really going to happen in the next couple of weeks, I would imagine. But we go to quite a few events, or we did, where there'd be people all over from Massachusetts, Connecticut. They can't register to vote using this form. Right underneath that, a lot of times this is going to be blank because people get mail where they actually live. But if they have
Rob, just a quick question. What do we do for people who are houseless with no address? How do they register to vote?
Yep. So folks can register to vote from their city or town hall. So the Board of Elections rules and regulations allow folks that don't have an address to register from their city or town hall using that address for their residence. The mailing address is if you have a different address that you receive mail, a P.O. box, or perhaps maybe you want your mail forwarded to work. That happens. So you can do that as well, but you just have to provide that residence in the section above. Party affiliation is the next section, and believe it or not, that is not required to fill in. So if somebody does not select any party, Democrat, Republican, unaffiliated, or other, they're going to automatically be listed as unaffiliated. So unaffiliated is essentially absent a political party. You may get questions if someone doesn't know what to be. They don't know what a Democrat is. They don't know what a Republican is. My suggestion is that you don't get into a discussion about the political spectrum. That's how we operate, because we're nonpartisan and we would never cross a line. I mean, I try to. You can provide like an overview maybe of what each party. I would just be very careful of doing that. I'd let the person know though that if they're unsure or they don't know what a Democrat or Republican is, that they should select unaffiliated. The other option is there just because we have to put it there, but essentially if someone checks off the other box and puts, let's say, Green Party or Libertarian or Moderate or what have you, they're automatically going to be registered to vote as unaffiliated, because you can only be registered to vote from a recognized political party in the state, and we've only got two, Democrat, Republican, and then the unaffiliated option. So if someone does put another form of party down, they're free to do so, but they are going to go in as unaffiliated. Again, you don't have to explain that to folks, but you do, just so you know, they will go in as unaffiliated. And Kennedy, did I see another chat? It was blinking, so I don't know if there's a question.
Katie posted the FAQ on voting with folks that are experiencing housing instability.
Oh, great. Okay. Thank you. The next section is this text box that essentially is the attestation to indicate that the individual is swearing that they're a U.S. citizen, that they live at the address they've provided, they're at least 18 when they vote, that they're not incarcerated in a correctional facility upon a felony conviction, they haven't been judged mentally incompetent by a court of law, and that the information they've provided on the form is true to the best of their knowledge. And if they knowingly provide false information, they could be fined, imprisoned, or if not a U.S. citizen, deported or refused entry into the United States. A couple things on this attestation. First and foremost, I know it is a general, although laws across the country are slowly starting to shift, but it is a general belief, or a lot of people believe that if you're a convicted felon, you're unable to register and cast a vote. And that is not the case in Rhode Island. It's been this way since 2006, where as long as you're not incarcerated in a correctional facility, so you're not in prison, you can register and you can vote, even if you've been convicted of a felony. So anybody can register to vote so long as they're not inside a correctional facility upon a felony conviction. Back before 2006, you had to complete your probation, your parole, all of that before you could register to vote, even if you were outside of prison. But now, So long as you're outside, you're not in a correctional facility, you can register and you can cast a ballot. So that's something that a lot of people, because there are some states that don't allow that. So it's just, I want to make sure that everyone's clear about that, because you may come across somebody who is in that situation, and we want to make sure they know they can register to vote. Okay, and then very important that in the dotted box that the individual signs the form. That's another must. They absolutely have to sign it, and they've got to put the date next to the form. And now is where I always like to talk a little bit about your obligation as somebody who is registering people to vote. I mean, you certainly could provide the form to an individual, and you could just let them, take it, fill it out, and put the onus on them to get it in. I can tell you that.
How are
Your
you?
question?
Good. So we're
No.
required to.
Okay. So, but just if you're going to do that, just know that and I have no facts to back this up. I just, from my experience, if you give someone the form, they're less likely to turn it in. Whereas if you have them fill it out and keep it, and you're somebody who's, I mean, clearly you're sitting on this training, you want to register people to vote. So the odds of you taking it and getting it to where it goes or it needs to go is better than leaving it with the individual. However, I would urge you to not, be pushy. If somebody wants to take it and fill it out themselves and send it in themselves, they should be allowed to do that. As you can imagine, we've just gone through this form, or most of it, and there is a lot of information on this form that is, private. It's personal. That I can understand how somebody wouldn't want to leave it with you, and don't take it personally. It's just something that people are uncomfortable. And so, but if someone does leave it with you, you have a responsibility now to get that form to where it needs to go. You're essentially accepting the responsibility to do that. And what I would suggest, especially now that we're within, 2 weeks or a little over 2 weeks before the deadline, you get this to an elections official as quickly as possible. Now, I'm not saying that if you register somebody at noontime, you should drop it off at 1 p.m. that same day, although that would be great. But in the next day or two, I would suggest getting this form, or getting the form, to our office, to the Board of Elections, or to one of the 39 cities and towns as quickly as possible, because no matter what date the individual signs this form, they could sign it today, which is September 22nd. And if you don't turn it in until October 5th, guess what? Doesn't matter. It was returned on October 5th, and that voter is not going to be able to vote. So just get this form in as quickly as possible. Don't leave it, in your car overnight. Don't leave it on your desk at work. Again, this is personal information. I would suggest having a folder or an envelope that you put the filled out forms in, so that they're not just laying around, and get them to an elections official as quickly as possible, especially because the deadline is quickly approaching. After the voter signs it, there's a couple more things that they should take a look at, including if they have a previous name. So if someone gets married or divorced or legally changes their name, we want to make sure that the city or town doesn't create a new record for the individual, but simply updates the record that's already on file. So it's a lot easier if they put their previous name down, so a city or town can look them up and just change their information, as opposed to registering new. And this happens a lot with folks that get married, because clearly it's very difficult to see a Jane Smith who gets married and is now Jane Jones as being the same person. They've got different last names, and even though they have the same date of birth, it's not out of the realm of possibility for people to have the same first name and date of birth. So if you can, or if the voter can provide any sort of extra information that'll make it easier for the city or town to register that person and pull their record and update it, that would be great. Same goes for previous address. If you registered to vote a John Smith, whose birthday is September 5th, 1960, there's chances are that there might be more than one John Smith who's got the same date of birth. Probably unlikely, but there's a chance. And at least if the voter can put down their previous address so that the city or town knows exactly which John Smith they're talking about, that would be great. The final piece on the form is down in the bottom there, a little language with a box that talks about being a poll worker, and if the voter's interested. I would do what you can to point people to that, especially this year where we've got COVID and people are concerned about working the polls. I can tell you that every single city and town hall, every single one, especially the cities, really could use poll workers. They really could. So whatever you can do as individuals yourselves working the polls, or pushing people to work, and I say push, I mean, obviously don't be pushy, but just to know that people are needed. People are needed this year to work the polls. They get paid. It's a very, very long day. Usually starts before 6 a.m. and ends at 9 p.m. It's a very difficult, it's a long day. I shouldn't say difficult, but it's a long day. And so it takes a lot to work, and you don't get paid a lot, but you do get paid. And so whatever you can do to help these cities and towns, especially Providence and Pawtucket and Woonsocket and Central Falls, Newport, Warwick, Cranston, some of the bigger locations or the cities, it really could use the help. So if you're not interested, see if your family, your friends, others are interested, because it's really important this year. So all this does on the form, checking this box, is it lets the city or town know that they're interested in being a poll worker. It does not obligate them. So if they check that box and then a week later says, you know what, I just don't feel comfortable, it's not a big deal at all. But if someone is interested, you should have them check that box, because it's important that that the cities and towns have enough folks to work the polls on election day. So the second page is nothing that needs to be filled out unless the voter is going to mail it themselves, and it's just you're going to put down, or they're going to put down, the city or town hall information, which is all listed here, so they know exactly where to send the voter registration form. They can put their return address up at the top. They do have to put postage on it, which is another reason why if you take the form from them, then you can return it without them having to pay postage. So that's really all the second page is. The first page is what's the most important to have to be filled out. It's the only page that needs to be filled out. And again, as you can see, it's a pretty easy form. Someone could probably fill it out in about 2 minutes. And so it's really an easy form. You also have the ability to help people fill it out. So if somebody has an issue with their writing, or if they just say, you know what, could you help me and fill this out? You certainly have the right to handwrite everything in as they tell you to, except they have to sign it and they have to date it. So it's their responsibility to make sure that you've written down what you're supposed to and what they told you. The onus is not on you, it's on them, because they're signing it. But if you are going to be one to fill it out, do the best you can to have good penmanship. We actually push people to vote using our website, because we don't have to deal with penmanship. I can tell you that my penmanship is awful, absolutely awful. And so, I really have to concentrate to write so that people understand what I'm saying. So what I would suggest is, as you are, you should assist people as asked. I wouldn't stand over them, if they don't ask you to. I think you should give them the form, and if they have questions, they certainly will ask you. But I do think it's a good idea that if they are going to leave it with you, that you review it before they walk away. And by review, all I mean is just make sure that all 3 boxes are checked up here. Just make sure that they filled in, everything that they have to. You don't have to fine tooth comb it, but if anything you can do, especially as we're getting real close to the deadline, to prevent this application getting to a city or town hall, having the city or town hall look at it and have to reject it because the person didn't do what they were supposed to. They didn't fill in the information correctly. So if you can avoid that, again, not your responsibility, but if you can avoid it for that individual, I would recommend it. Just review the form to make sure that everything looks pretty good before they step away. And that's really, it. I think if you're out and about, one thing that we always get asked is, where can you go to register people? And basically my answer is any place that allows you to go. If you're going to a business, you just have to make sure the business allows for it. So if you go to Stop and Shop, or you go to Whole Foods, or you go to, whatever community event, just make sure that the owner or the director or the organizer is okay with you registering people there. I can tell you that in normal circumstances, we are out just about every single day at this point, going to different community events. So I would be surprised if there's a community event or a community organizer or an event coordinator or director that wouldn't be willing to have you set up a booth or to allow you to walk around with a clipboard. Again, I know that events are very, very rare, I'm sure, over the next couple of weeks, but I'm sure there will be some. And so if you are going to go to an event, just make sure that the individual or the owner, what have you, the organizer is okay with you registering people. Having clipboards is another good thing. I tend to think that depending on the type of event, if it's an event where people are like walking by booths, it's good to have a booth. But if it's an event where people are just kind of milling around and doing different things, it might be better to have a a clipboard and you go up to people and say, hey, are you registered? Again, without being pushy, because people tend to stop at something that they're interested in, not something that they feel like they have to do something. And so just be careful don't take offense if someone walks by your table and doesn't want to register or doesn't want to stop. It happens all the time, but just use your judgment on how best to approach people. I think one other major piece is that if you are going to walk around and ask people about voting, you should ask them 2 questions. The first is the obvious: are you registered to vote? But the second follow-up question should be, but are you registered to vote where you currently live? Because a lot of people have been voting since they were 18 years old. So it might be they've been voting for 5 years, 10 years, 40 years, 50 years, and they've been a registered voter for that long. However, they might have moved in the last year or the last 2 years, didn't realize that they need to update their address for voting, and just never thought of it. So it's not good enough, in my opinion, to ask somebody if they're registered, because someone could say, yes, I'm registered. If you don't ask that follow-up and say, but are you registered where you live? They might say, oh, you know what? I did move about 1.5 years ago. It seems like ages ago, but it was since the last election. And I don't think that I updated my license at the DMV because of COVID or whatever. So while Rhode Island has very, very good registration rates, most people that want to be registered are registered. It is still something that I think you should follow up with the individual if they do say they're registered, because you want to make sure that they're registered from where they currently live, because if they're not going to be able to vote from their new location. So it's those 2 questions I think that you should ask. And I see another chat. I can't see what it says, but I think there's a question.
So what should someone do if they have multiple recent previous addresses and they don't know which one they're registered at?
Good question. I think you fit as many as you can on there, and do the best you can to remember. Again, that's not a piece of information that's overly important. It's just really helpful for the towns. So don't stress over it. You could even write a couple of addresses, 2 or 3 addresses is fine. And a lot of people, if they can't remember, the exact street number, Smith Street in Providence is good enough, or even Providence in some instances is good enough. Whatever the voter can provide to help the cities and towns is really, really good. So whatever they can remember is good. And more than one address if they can't recall which was the last one.
And what number can people call to inquire where they are currently registered to vote?
So they can call, it's not on, so they can call any one of the numbers on this form. Clearly calling your city or town is the best. They can also call our office, and I'll go back to our website. Our office number is 401-222-2340. We have access to the statewide database, and so we could look it up. The city and town could look it up. So there are plenty of ways to look it up here, and I'm trying to figure out where I'll contact us. Here's our information. Also 211. We're working with the United Way this year for the first time, which is great. And so a lot of election questions are going to be answered there. But you can see our information here, email, phone, and then same thing with the Board of Elections, email, phone as well. And then the city and town halls contact informations are here as well, as also there on the form. So plenty of places that you can call to figure out where you're registered to vote. And so I'll just keep talking for a few more minutes in case there are any other questions. But the other thing too is I just want to thank all of you in advance for whatever you're going to be able to do in the next 2.5 weeks to get people registered to vote. Because again, it's really difficult this year. DMV, you have to get an appointment. We're getting tons of emails from people concerned that they're not able to update their license in time for November so they can vote in person. And just know that the Board of Elections has now allowed, or I should say that I think the General Assembly passed it, or I can't remember if it was a law or a regulation, but an expired license up to 6 months is good enough to vote. So if your license expired in June or July or August or September or October, you can still use that to register to register too, but you can also use it to cast a ballot on election day. So it's important that folks know that. But just thank you in advance, because I know that a lot of folks, however many people you register to vote in the next 2.5 weeks, I can almost guarantee you that they probably wouldn't have registered without you. Maybe someone else would have asked them, or maybe it would have popped into their head, at some time before October 4th. But I'm pretty sure that without you, being out in the community and again, being where you're going to be, that these folks wouldn't be registered to vote. And it's a pretty cool feeling to know that, you were the reason why someone was registered to vote. So again, I cannot stress the importance of making sure that these applications get to where they need to go as quickly as possible. People are trusting you with their information. I mean, I would argue this is one of the biggest elections this country's ever faced, going back to since when the country was founded. I truly believe that. And I think a lot of people are interested one way or the other, whether they really like the way things are going or they really don't, or they, what have you. I think we're going to see a lot of people voting this year, and they can't vote unless they register. Now, we do have a stipulation. So after October 4th, if you're out and about and people will say, hey, I want to register to vote, and it's October 5th or after, there is a stipulation in state law that does allow people who did not register by the deadline to be able to go to their city or town hall on election day and cast a ballot for president and vice president only. So there's a law that allows that. So if somebody missed the deadline to register to vote, so they forgot or they didn't do it or what have you, October 5th and afterwards, if someone didn't register to vote, they should go to their city or town hall on election day, and they can fill out a voter registration form and cast a ballot for president and vice president only. So that's a pretty cool law. Now, I say this. City and town halls, for the most part, in the city of Providence, they normally use the Dunkin' Donuts Center because it's such a big city and they can't fit everybody at City Hall. So Providence uses the Dunk. A few other towns may use other places, by and large, at city and town halls. So if just have the voter check with their city or town hall about where those locations are, mostly at city and town halls, but there are a few, especially Providence, where they use other locations. So all is not lost if somebody does not update their address, or doesn't register to vote by October 4th.
And we have one more question. Will mail ballot applications be sent to people who register right up to the deadline?
Yeah, so we've asked the cities and towns that when they register a voter, that they, in the letter that's sent to the voter to welcome them as a voter and congratulate them, that they should also include a mail ballot application. Because they clearly, if the voter wasn't registered, then they didn't get an application from us. So we asked the cities and towns to put those in the acknowledgement note, with the acknowledgement notices in the envelope, so that people are able to fill it out and send it back as quickly as possible. And I would urge you that if you want to vote by mail, that you get that application back as soon as possible. So we're processing them now. The cities and towns are processing them now. We plan on sending, for anybody who has applied for a mail ballot up until now, we expect to send that file to the mail ballot printer next Monday, and the mail ballots will be sent on or around October 5th, and then daily after that. So if someone has already applied and their application has been accepted, then you can expect your ballot on or around October 9th or 10th. So just keep that in mind. But if you haven't applied yet and you want to vote by mail, even though you have until October 13th, I suggest applying as quickly as possible. Also know, and I mentioned it before, there are 3 ways to vote this year: by mail, which we just talked about. You can vote early, which we talked about a little bit ago. So starting on so the mail ballot deadline is October 13th. You have to apply by a mail ballot by October 13th. Starting on the 14th, you can, if you didn't apply for a mail ballot by the 13th, you can go to your city or town hall up until 4 p.m. on November 2nd, which is the day before the election. So October 14th through November 2nd, you can go to your city or town hall and you can cast a ballot in person. It's just the same ballots that you would see on election day, except you're voting early. So it's another way for people to be able to cast a ballot. And then, of course, you've got election day. And just note that if you are going to vote on election day, there will be safety measures taking place to make sure that everyone is okay. The PPE and gloves and things, you wear your own mask, but the poll workers are going to be protected. So you don't have to worry about that, although you still have to take precautions, wear your mask and all of that. And just know that you should check to see where you're going to vote, at which polling place. I'd say at the end of October. I expect to have our website updated with polling places in the middle of October, but because of COVID, and we saw in the primary a few weeks ago, polling places were pulling out last minute because of concerns with COVID. So just check back as close to election day as possible for your polling place in case things have changed. So you've got the 3 ways to vote: vote from home, vote early, or vote at the polling place. And just know that if you do want to vote in one of those, the second 2 measures, either early or in person on election day, don't apply for a mail ballot. Don't apply for a mail ballot. You don't want to apply for a mail ballot and then go and vote in person, because you're going to be coded in the poll book as having voted by mail. and they're going to have you vote what's called a provisional ballot, which is, an extra step with voting. So just, I would urge you to make the decision. And once you make the decision, stick with it. If you want to vote by mail, apply for a mail ballot and vote by mail. If you want to vote early or vote on election day, don't fill out the mail ballot application, because it's only going to make your voting experience a little bit tougher. And so it's better off that you make a decision and stick with it. And obviously, if things change and circumstances change, there are ways to make sure that it's done. No one's going to be turned away, but it just adds a layer of complexity that can be avoided if you make a decision before election day on how you're going to vote.
And we have another question. Could you send in a registration form and a mail ballot application form together?
Yes, so long as it's before October 4th. So if you send a registration form on October 7th with the mail ballot application, then both of them are going to be rejected. I shouldn't say that. The registration form is not going to be rejected. It just won't be entered in until after the November election. So you're not going to be able to vote. But your mail ballot application will be rejected because you didn't register to vote in time.
Does anyone have any more questions that they want to ask Rob?
I have a question. I was working a poll on the primary day, and a lot of people said they checked their, can you hear me?
Yes.
A lot of people said they checked their polling location that morning, and they had 2 polling locations listed, and they went to one of the 2. And then when they got to the polling place, the people at working the poll said they couldn't vote there and they had to go to the other one. And this happened to dozens of people.
Was this for the September primary or the June primary?
September primary. This is in Smithfield.
Oh, in Smithfield. Okay. So I remember on election day there being an issue, and I don't recall what it was, but I do believe it was rectified once we found out about it.
Okay.
So that obviously that shouldn't happen. You only have one. And the reason why I asked about which election is because for the June primary, in certain communities, the bigger communities, they did allow you to vote at multiple polling places. And obviously, you could only vote once, but you had the option to go to a few different ones.
Right.
But for September, you only have one option. For November, you're only going to have one option as well. So I don't recall exactly what the issue was, but it was not correct, clearly. And so we rectified it as soon as we heard about it. But that should not have happened. You only have one option for voting when it comes to a polling place on election day.
And then a lot of people I spoke to also were asking to be notified about their polling location. Are there any measures in place for that to happen?
There's nothing that forces towns to notify, although a lot of towns do take a precaution. Actually, I use Smithfield for an example. I spoke with Smithfield a few weeks back, and they were considering sending a mailing to all voters about what their polling place was. The challenge with doing that is, it's a great idea. However, with COVID, I know that the week before the primary, there were 3 polling places in the state that had to be moved. The week before, like less than a week before the election, which obviously makes it very difficult. And so I think those voters were notified, but you just have to be careful because you want to make sure that you're giving proper information. And if you send out a postcard and then have to send another one, it's even more confusing. Although, there were, I think, almost 300 polling places open for the primary, and if only 3 were moved, I'll take those odds any day by sending, a mailing to somebody to let them know of their polling places, because the odds that they change are low, but the odds are still there. Some towns do take it upon themselves to send notices to folks. I believe Cranston, Providence, they do, but not everybody does. So it really is up to the city or town, and I know that a lot of folks are talking about it to make sure that they make the right decision on that, but it's not something that they're obligated to do by law.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? All right, so we're going to start to wrap up. Rob, thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak to everyone today. We really appreciate it, and hopefully the information was very helpful, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure, and thanks again to all of you for the work you're going to do and the work you have done to register people and to get them what they need. It's an important year, and it's so much tougher because of COVID. So anything that you can do to help would be great.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you, everyone.